Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I have one of the easiest tasks in the world in introducing a gentleman who will be moderator, and he really is a moderator in many senses of the word. He has a marvelous perspective, marvelous command of language, and a wonderful gift for telling people what certain things are really about. We've heard from him from this platform many times. We can't hear from him too often, but today we are simply asking him to play a minor role for the moment and take charge of introducing the speaker for the afternoon. So it's Professor Merrill Root, one of our favorites.
Thank you, Colonel Bunker. Ladies and gentlemen, mine is a dual honor this afternoon. For one thing, I am introduced by Colonel Bunker. For the second thing, I have the honor of introducing General Clyde Jefferson Watts, a splendid soldier, a magnificent patriot, a noble man. Now, in so doing, I feel very much like, little boy Blue, who has lost his horn and is perhaps asleep under a haystack. Or I feel a bit like Tom Thumb. Here I'm introducing Jack the Giant Killer. Here I'm introducing St. George, who has slain the fiery dragon. Here we have a great soldier of America. We have a warrior of God. We have a man who has won so many honors and so many medals that I can't possibly remember them. And so I'll just read a few of them so that you'll be sure not to miss anything. They're all so important. He served in the Second World War in India, in China, and in Burma. He spearheaded the drive through Burma, and he won the Air Medal, a Bronze Star, the Cloud Banner of Ordway. I love that. All the poetic blood in me thrills to that. He won the Cloud Banner of Ordway, Chinese Combat Command Commendation, Chinese Yun Wai Medal, and the Atlantic Pacific Ribbon with 2 campaign stars. And I can only add to this that I never go out on any clear and starry night without looking to see whether Aldebaran and Orion are still in the sky, or whether they haven't been lifted and, as they should be, placed as medals for General Watts. But he has not only been a splendid soldier against the outward enemies of America, but he is also a splendid soldier against the inward enemies of America. You know, it's a strange thing, but they take that not too jolly red giant and they give him vitamins of recognition and other things so that he will survive. And anybody who is against that sort of thing he's a patriot and he's in danger. General Watts has been one who has defended those who have been in danger because they have been against the enemies of America. I know that sometimes that's a little humorous. I myself have had some experiences. Once in Richmond, Indiana, I was opposing fluoridation. And while I was there, they never got it through. But I used to get anonymous calls about every night. They were always anonymous. These liberals, they're so cowardly. They're anonymous. And they'd call me up. I remember one evening, a certain gentleman, I'll call him a gentleman, he called me up and he said, "Are you a dentist?" And I said, "No, I'm simply the daring young man on the flying trapeze." And he said, "But if you're not a dentist, how do you dare to talk about teeth?" "Well," I said, "I have a few of my own." But sometimes, it is not as humorous as that. It's dangerous. And when General Edwin Walker, also a splendid soldier, was railroaded into the booby hatch, he was defended by General Watts. If you're not crazy enough to believe the crazy ideas of the liberals, they call you crazy. And they send you to the psychological Siberia of America. That is, pardon my language, the booby hatch or the nut house or whatever you will. And that you have to be defended. Well, General Watts was one who defended General Walker. He saw that he had justice. He saw that he was freed. He even won large sums of money from the media of the establishment. Of course, the Supreme Court has something to say about that, but at least he won the victory, and that is a noble thing. And the great thing about General Watts is that he is a man. Today the trouble is we don't have too many men. We have partial men. We have zombies. We have caricatures. We have floating ribs. We have dismembered limbs. We have membranes running around. And especially we have, I would say, I define the pseudo-intellectual this way. He is a person who has he's too fond of what he too fondly thinks for his own brains. He might almost be defined as the gray plush of a brain without any spine to hold him up and without any bloodstream to nourish him. And he calls himself an intellectual. Now, in this dilemma, we have, fortunately, this afternoon, a man. What more need I say? What more can I say? We have with us this afternoon a man, General Clyde Jefferson Watts.
Professor, in the presence of a professor, I, from long training, am habitually humble. One of my opponents one time said he never saw a man that had more things to be humble about. Today, I have a fantastic subject. The current subject, a subject that involves life and death, not only of America, but of the world. If you will pardon, however, a short diversion, I cannot resist the overwhelming temptation of picking up the challenge of Colonel Bunker to you good Massachusetts people, whom I understand are threatened with a legislative enactment requiring sex education in your schools. I had the rather challenging experience last year of visiting with an old conservative friend of mine, whose dinner I buy from time to time. Perhaps he can't afford it, Mr. H.L. Hunt. Mr. Hunt was chiding me very pointedly about the silly publicity Oklahoma had been receiving about sex education in our schools. So I said, Mr. Hunt, let's get off of this subject and get on to something else, because if these educators could just get 1/10 as antsy pants to teach Americanism in their schools as they are to teach sex, we would have undoubtedly a different country within perhaps 5 years. Mr. Hunt sadly shook his head, says, Clyde, I doubt it. Unless these educators are able to perform a whole lot more effective job of teaching sex in school than they've ever done teaching Americanism, I sadly fear that the next 5 years will see America a nation of perverts. That went over their head, Professor. Now, the professor introduced me as Clyde Jefferson Watts, which, thanks to my wonderful old Cherokee Indian granddaddy, whose father was a full-blood, and he picked up the name of Jefferson about that time. You can imagine that when I started my career in those days, we couldn't vote until we were 21, but when I became 21, I, of course, with the middle name of Jefferson, registered as a you-know-what. And having suffered through the travails and the turmoils of Rooseveltianism and various other liberalisms, you can imagine that I am now, in the language of John Smith's, for the past several years, have been a now disillusioned Republican. The future, I can only say, is indefinite, is uncertain, but is damn sure full of fight. The time has arrived, fellow Americans, for America to be peopled by Americans. And so, to our subject today of turmoil in Asia. Having spent some of the most challenging years of my life up and down the Burma Road, accomplishing what we were challenged with as an objective of opening a line of communication to an allied nation, having realized at that time, and even more now, that the then greatest war in the world was brought on by a repetition of history. Incidentally, Professor, my high school teacher, who was certainly not a doctor, as they probably would be now, she was certainly qualified to be a professor, told me that the most significant fact of history is man's absolute refusal to learn from history. I'm afraid that's right. Because in 1941 through 45, we were fighting as a simple aftermath of the high-level leaders of the world engaging in a struggle known as the balance of power. Throughout recorded history, and undoubtedly before history was ever recorded, the only objective for which tribes, states, countries, and nations will engage in mass murder has been to retain or attain the balance of power. We have seen it consistently through World War II. However, at the end of World War II, the objectives, the strategies, the tactics of the world conflict became far more subtle. They became far more sophisticated, where a simple confrontation of power, military or otherwise, was no longer possible. We observed about the start of World War II the end of a long and, I would say, good tradition known as the Pax Britannica, under which our British forebears, by virtue of understanding the conflicts confronting them as a sovereign nation, were able to maintain a relative degree of peace until there arose across the English Channel and in their same area of Europe another powerful and ruthless group that were determined to challenge the Pax Britannica and bring out a conflict of force, seeking to seize in the hands of a brutalitarian dictatorship the balance of power. I can well remember, Professor, an evening when our radios were first coming into use, the great Winston Churchill, and I can almost hear it tonight, or this afternoon rather, as he told his fellow British throughout the world that as of that critical time, this is one of the most awe-striking periods in the long history of France and Britain. And he went on to point out that it was also the most sublime. Side by side, the British and French people had advanced to rescue not only Europe but mankind from what he then recognized as the foulest and most soul-destroying tyranny that had ever darkened and stained the pages of history. Had we the vision to look into the future, we could have told that wonderful patriot, that greatest of all people of his day, that Winston, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because just over the hill there is the foulest and most soul-destroying tyranny that the world not only has ever seen but will see. There is a tyranny that is able to combine the force, the power, the relentless capability of seeking to dominate human beings into a sophisticated new type of warfare before the like of which the world has never before seen. A group of people with infinite genius that are able to expand the perimeters of conflict from the Asiatic mainland to the periphery of the entire world, to create a subtle, sophisticated new type of fourth-dimensional conflict, the like of which the world has never seen, who are able to congeal into their ruthless and evil hands the psychological and subtle emotional and mental approaches to make free people cooperate in their own destruction. So now, with that background, recognizing that our enemy now is a very sophisticated, highly trained, clever little group of people that we, for lack of a better term, call communists. Really, they're not communists, they're gangsters. Seeking world domination, seeking the balance of power behind the smokescreen of a false political ideology. But so infinitely capable have those people become that they have induced the most literate nation on the face of the earth and perhaps in the pages of history to avidly cooperate in their own destruction. So that we find Asia today in a state of turmoil, the like of which history has never seen. For the last couple of weeks, I've had at my house a young lad, Xiao Xior, who is a Chinese student from Michigan State University that has spent the summer with us the last couple of years. He is the son of General Xiao Beituan, our Chinese artillery commander with whom I spent night after night and day after day planning the conflict and the combat along the Burma Road. Incidentally, for the benefit of some of you old soldiers that were here, as a Chinese artillery combat liaison officer, working with General Xiao Beituan and his Chinese artillery, I had in our outfit 9 old German 150s, 4 British 115s, 3 Russian 3-inches, 4 Krupp 75s, and 8 battalions of American pack howitzers. By use of the Confucius factor, we were able to concentrate and combine all that firepower and blast the poor, sad sack, miserable Japs off the Burma Road. But at that time, warfare, my friends, was simple. The objective was to destroy your enemy and his will to fight. We were able to do that. We were able to open the Burma Road under circumstances where the United States of America, for the first time in recorded history, held in the hands of Christian civilization the balance of power, held in their hands the capability of making the brutalitarian forces of the world live like human beings. Tragically, the responsibility that was ours was literally cast aside and thrown out the window. Because a few years before then, this ruthless enemy we had created a new type of warfare that they were waging against us at the time. And Miss Anna McKinney told me positively, whatever I did, to come up with a new speech. And if you give me about 45 seconds, Miss Anna, I'll have a new speech. But we're still at war. We're fighting the fourth dimensional warfare phases of World War III, and I recognize a few new faces here, and I can't avoid giving you this short briefing as a preliminary to turmoil in Asia, because it is the direct and proximate cause of the dilemma facing America today as we see our president making frantic trips to both segments of the Iron Curtain, to Beiping, to Moscow. for the accomplishment of what objective as yet we are unable to tell, in a manner that we know supports the cause of the enemy. So we must then have a short look at the fourth dimensional type warfare in which we're embroiled with this brutalitarian enemy. We must realize that back in the 30s, 36 or 7 as I remember, at the Linnean School of Political Warfare, with infinite genius, these people made an analysis of the future of the world. They realized that their objective was to rule the world, that their enemy America had an objective of living with them in peaceful coexistence, so that, as never before, the issues were so simplified, were so understandable, that they derived a strategy with which they could win. They recognized that there was no way that a fourth-rate backward nation could compete with the productive genius of the United States of America and with the capability of our air, sea, and land forces in conventional warfare, where the objective was to destroy your enemy in his will to fight. So with this infinite genius that they had developed, they created an entirely new sector of warfare, in which the objective is to destroy the will to fight. Your enemy then will cooperate in his own destruction. They created this fourth dimensional warfare, political, social, psychological, economic, and to a very small extent military. So by the time we were opening the Burma Road, the new warfare was gradually coming to pass. I have here a book that's a little old now. Probably no one's read it. I'm sure no one's read it for years. But this is the Lattimore story by John T. Flynn. Without knowing what was happening to us, on Thanksgiving Eve of 1944, I had a personal experience that will live with me for the rest of my life, that is epitomized by the Lattimore affair by John T. Flynn. We were sitting out on an observation post overlooking a beautiful rice valley full of Japs, planning an attack for the next day. I was briefing the Chinese on the artillery setup, the timing, the targets, our ammunition supply, coordinating the attack between the artillery and the infantry. I looked around, they were paying no attention. I was absolutely amazed because those Chinese youngsters were hard fighters. They were selfless. They were courageous. Death meant no more to them than brushing their teeth. I looked around, looked back again. I said, "Niman Shenzai Shon Sama Dongshi. Wochong Huan Yi Sui Jiao. She lied, she lied. Wake up, you stupid nutheads. There's a war on. What's the matter?" Well, we're not worried about this war. It's finished. But unless we stop these Chinese communists, they're going to destroy the world, and you Americans are supporting them. So we came on back to Kunming, China, after we'd opened the Burma Road. I was privileged to form a deep friendship with Dr. Zhang Molin, the Minister of Education of Nationalist China. One night, we were sitting in Dr. Zhang's little apartment. I can literally remember the expression on his face. He said, "I will tell you, Americans, the most dangerous man in the world. You think it's Hitler, don't you?" This was in March of 1945. Yes, you were, the 1st of April. I said, "Certainly, Doctor. No, it is a former student of mine, a man who has the evil genius," the first time I'd heard that term, "the imagination, the determination, and the racial hatred to convert my Chinese people into a volcanic force that will someday overwhelm and destroy your world. His name is Mao Zedong." I said, "Doctor, I never heard of him." He said, "You will." And I did, because at that very time, Owen Lattimore, John Carter Vinson, John Patton Davies, and John Stuart Service, literally overwhelmed by the enemy's strategy of using man's hope for peace as a weapon of war, had been convinced that the only way we could have peace in the Orient was to accomplish a subtle transition from the command of the generalissimo, than whom a greater man never lived, into Mao Zedong, the control of 700+ million helpless Chinese. Now that transition was very effectively, very subtly accomplished, thereby starting the war in Korea, the war in Vietnam, thereby starting the turmoil that exists in Asia today. For a while, we had this turmoil fairly well contained. Came Korea, and our Dean Acheson literally created the new strategy of flexible response. Victory is a dirty word. He fired General MacArthur. We then moved to Vietnam, and I can't resist at this point telling you another little story. I have a very close friend, or had one, he's dead now, rest his soul, General Stan Malloy was the commander in Korea. Mr. W. Averell Harriman made a trip in 1961 to Laos. His objective at that time, of course, having been briefed by whoever the predecessor of Kissinger is, that he should go to Laos and create a coalition government. Stan Malloy cornered him in his headquarters and said, Mr. Ambassador, if you go to Laos and create a coalition government, will it not fall into the hands of the communists exactly as did the mainland of China, and give the enemy a corridor into the heart of our defensive position in Vietnam? He said, you must realize that whenever you accept the defensive, you violate the principle of the offensive under one strategic and tactical concept. You isolate the battlefield with firepower, roadblocks, an impenetrable object, an ocean, a river, something that will deny the enemy a corridor into the heart of your defensive position. Now, in my opinion, if you go to Laos and create a coalition government, it will fall into the hands of the enemy. They will have a privileged sanctuary from which they can direct their power against our defensive position in Vietnam. We will then find the enemy in front of us, behind us, above us, below us, on the flanks, and coming in the windows. Typical of a diplomat, Mr. Harriman looked over at the general and says, General, this is a diplomatic, not a military matter. We shall discuss it no further. He went into Laos, created a coalition government, gave the enemy a corridor right into the heart of our defensive position at the cost of thousands of American lives and billions on billions on billions of dollars. Now, those are the kind of, for lack of a better term, I'm sure the liberalites would hate it, I must say a lame-brained strategy that has put America in the position we occupy today, primarily in the Orient and secondarily around the world. Let's reverse that. Let's say secondarily in the world, secondary minus in the Orient, and primarily in the United States. I'll tell you why I think that. 2 years ago, I went to Vietnam to visit with my son, who was an infantry officer serving with the Vietnamese on the Cambodian border. I spent several weeks there and went from one end of the battlefield to the other. Came home, reported that, in my opinion, at that time, the Vietnamese war, as we knew it, was over. The only real war I saw in Vietnam at that time was in the Cambodian bars, where these news hosts go to write their silly stories. But to give you the punchline of the experience, the few months before, there had been at my house in Oklahoma City Chief Justice Tran Minh Tiet, the Chief Justice of Vietnam. He had a little banquet for me. After it was over, he and a citizen from India, who was on the United Nations Peace Control Commission, collared me in a corner and said, General, what do you think of border dispute between Russia and China? I said, Mr. Chief Justice, I think it is phony. He said, what mean phony? It means that this border dispute is false. It is a very clever propaganda strategy designed to capture America between the belligerence of the Chinese, the craftiness of the Soviets, and ultimately crush us between them. He said, well, that's almost what I mean, but not quite. You first American I ever hear talk that way. He said, we afraid border dispute between Russia and China be settled along the Mississippi River. Now, folks, unless we awaken and understand the basis of the conflict in the Orient today that has brought turmoil in an area that we had completely secure in 1945, the ultimate border dispute between Russia and China will be settled exactly along the Mississippi River with the help, aid, and comfort of so-called liberalites in America. And, Professor, to me, a liberalite is one who realizes with all humility, with all avid eagerness, that a soft heart is a wonderful virtue. But the stupid twerp can't realize that when topped with a soft head is disaster. Now, there's the problem that we face today, is the capability of America understanding the nature of the turmoil that exists today in the Orient as a direct and proximate result of the fact that the Oriental people have lost complete confidence in the integrity and the determination of the United States of America. We have in Taiwan today the real head of the Chinese government is the son of the Generalissimo, his oldest son, Zhang Jingguo, who was educated in Russia, who, when I was over there in 1967, was very avidly pro-American. But due to the fantastic course of events that have occurred in the last few months, as a result of which those people have lost complete confidence in the integrity and the determination of America to maintain a realistic balance of power in the Orient, there have been overtures going on between the Soviet Russians and the Chinese government on Taiwan. Much more turmoil, more confusion, more inability of the simple, dedicated little Oriental to realize that the hope of the future rests in the determination of America to do what they say they will do. I'm reminded of a comment that a little Madame New made after the State Department arranged for the assassination of her husband. She came over here and said, any nation that has America for an ally doesn't need enemies. So, friends, tonight we face, as of this afternoon, not just tonight, and I really hope it's not as late as it seems to me, but I'm afraid it's later than we think. But unless we may wake up when the border dispute is settled along the Mississippi River, we will look back in retrospect and realize that the turmoil that started in Asia was a direct and proximate result of the United States of America through misguided liberalites in our government, and some that were far worse, literally shifting the balance of power from the hands of Christian civilization into the hands of this brutalitarian enemy. So that we find at this time our great America having deliberately reduced our posture of defense from a number one power down to a number two power, so that we must find our president with his hat in his hand going into countries that have an unbroken record of violence, of murder, of slaughter, of the most vicious type of repression known to the annals of history. Why does the president do that? He does it, my friend, because he senses in the indecision, in the lack of determination in his great country, a weakness and an incapability to challenge this enemy for the balance of power on the potential field of battle in Vietnam, or in any other areas of human conflict where victory has heretofore produced the balance of power. Illustrative of the problem of the deterioration of our great country that we face today was a traumatic experience I had last year. I kept getting a call from a professor at New York State University that William Kunstler will speak at our university on the 18th of May, 1971. We must have someone to speak behind him. We cannot get a soul. I said, there's not a way I can come. I've got lawsuits all over the place. I'm working morning, noon, and night. I just can't possibly get away. He called on the 16th, you must come. Day after tomorrow night, Kunstler will speak here, and we don't have a soul to speak behind him. So I gritted my teeth, got in my airplane, got General Dave Hutchinson, who was an old buddy that used to be General MacArthur's Air Task Force commander, to go along with me. I have an awful bad habit for you eagles here that are jet pilots. The minute I get off the ground, I get completely relaxed. The whole world gets beautiful, the sun shines bright, the world's all right, and I go to sleep. So I took General Hutch along to either keep me awake or watch where we were going while we were flying the airplane, pulled into Binghamton, New York, got to the auditorium, a group of students, well, perhaps slightly larger than this audience is today, applauding this miserable Kunstler as he advocated the complete abolition of the judicial system of the United States. No longer, he said, is it relevant. Remember, folks, that is a code word among the liberalites, relevant. And the minute he said our system of jurisprudence is no longer relevant, boy, the applause just rattled the rafters. He said no longer does it protect the poor or the black, the disadvantaged. He had a very simple solution for it, turned over to me. That was all he advocated. I'll improve it, he said. So it came time for me to speak, and as you could imagine, I was as popular as a skunk at a lawn party. standing before this snarling group of young people, I said, young people, you may think that you're here in this great institution getting an education. That's what you should be doing. But unfortunately, your number one activity, and that of all young people of America today, is selecting for our country a type of discipline. There are only two. Don't kid yourself about an easy middle ground. There is a discipline of force from the mouth of a gun, the point of a knife, the end of a whip, that is implemented by our enemy with fiendish effectiveness and is your destiny unless you wake up. On the other side of the spectrum, there is a fabulous discipline of faith that has heretofore been the symbol of America itself, under which a well-trained and disciplined young American will voluntarily and cheerfully do the right thing at the right place at the right time, even at the cost of his life. Came the questions. We had a 20-minute question and answer period. Almost an hour later, the hands were waving. Essay-type questions were being propounded all over the place. Finally, one little urchin kept waving his hand. I said, young man, you've had two questions. Let's hear from somebody else. I'll give you another question after a while. Let's hear from that poor little girl behind you there. Long, curly hair, beautiful, delicate features, flowered shirtwaist, so she sounds off. I said, honey, I've got artillery ears and I can't hear a word you say. Would you stand up, please, and speak louder? She stood up, and it was a boy. So in the utmost of frustration, I did a little quick analysis there and said, there, young people, there's a reason for this. Has to be. I sadly fear that you young people have been brainwashed. You are victims by my concept of an unfortunate draft law that we passed for the Korean War. We exempted college students from the draft. In a few short years, we have found that our college faculties started to fill with soft, sophisticated, overaged, overeducated, overprivileged draft dodgers. Now those miserable bums, I said, quote, will sit on the college faculty. They will engage in high-level academic cerebration. They will realize something's wrong. They have no remorse whatsoever for running out in defense of their country. Then, having rationalized, they say, of course, there's nothing wrong with me. So that leaves one conclusion. There's something wrong with this damn country. It is not worth defending. I said, young people, level with me. Hadn't you been taught that? I couldn't have staged it anyway, with my own group of, as Congressman Smith said, my own group of manipulators. But at that critical time, 10 or 12 long-haired professors stalked out of the meeting. And I'll say for the kids, after it was over, 200 or 300 of them came down front and said, what can we do? And then we started analyzing the problem of the turmoil that I could see building up in Asia. I had no concept at that time that our president would go over there and give to the Orientals the most critical thing in their civilization is face. They will give their lives, they will give their property, they will give everything that they possess for face. At that time, he went to visit with a ruthless, backward nation of butchers that had the blood of millions of people on their hands. He went to visit with them with his hand behind his back, with his head down, giving them the face that will permit them to continue to wage this psychological or fourth-dimensional warfare in a manner that, unless America is able to convince them we have wiped out the stupidity that has destroyed our motivation in this country, unless we're able to have a Renaissance type of awakening in this country, and let the people in the Orient know that the confidence they had heretofore placed in the United States of America, in our determination and in our integrity, has not been misplaced, unless we're able to convince them of that change in America itself, we're going to find three spheres of conflicting influence building up out of the present turmoil that exists in the Orient. We will find the Chinese communists who, of course, are resentful of all others coming into their projected sphere of influence in the Orient. We will find them expansive, endeavoring to take over and spread their brutalitarian form of communism. We will find the Soviet Russians subtly spreading their more effective type of communism, not in Asia. When this happens, the Soviet efforts will be more directly concentrated in the United States of America. We will have these dissident groups, these protesters, these miserable people who wonder why risk your lives to defend the United States of America. We will find these people gradually disarming the will to fight and resist, to where when the final turnaround comes, when the final assault is lodged to accomplish the division of America along the Mississippi River between the two different facets of communism, we'll find our great country completely disarmed, psychologically, militarily, and spiritually. So what I'm hoping to get tonight is some type of a spiritual revival and revolution that will challenge the old concept: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But God help life and liberty. America had become such an entertainment-oriented civilization that life and liberty and the principles of Christianity that have made this the courageous type of a society that Congressman Smith grew up in have so eroded as to cause a complete famine of confidence around the world in not only the ability of the United States of America to continue to exist with our present type of civilization, but the question that is arising now is, do we deserve it? You hear around the periphery of our country, especially in the gathering of the protesters and in the news media, that the people we're fighting for in Vietnam are not worth the effort we're putting in there. When you stop to think of all the tragedy of some 50,000 lives that have been lost, but compare that with the fact that we have a much larger loss on the highways of America, raising the question of whether the Vietnamese are worth our sacrifice. I'll guarantee they'd have been worth it if we'd have approached it as we have approached every war until Korea. That thing would have been over in 6 months' time. The Orient, in which there is now turmoil and chaos, would have had complete confidence in the United States of America. We would have realized that those little Vietnamese are some of the finest people in the world. While I was over there, I had the moving experience of meeting one of their little soldiers. The night I arrived in my boys' headquarters area of Mukwa, and incidentally, there's a fine young special service staff sergeant back here that has served within a few miles of this very area. I had a wonderful time visiting with him, with him and one of his buddies this afternoon. Special Forces soldiers who have spent years in that area. This lad in particular spent 4 years in Vietnam and 2 years in Thailand. He told me that he had an experience while he was in Thailand visiting with a Thai general, General Y. Chi. Wasn't that it, Sergeant? I got it backwards. Thank you, Sergeant. Anyhow, the general asked him this very piercing question: when did the United States start having a premier? The sergeant said, "Well, General, we have no premier." The general says, "Well, what about Premier Kissinger?" With those concepts among our allies, how can we expect anything but turmoil, not only among our allies, but among our enemies, many of whom have for years desperately been hoping that the United States would come forward with the typical Yankee capability of plying through this smoke screen, getting to the heart of the target, and cleaning things up. But with those kind of concepts, how can we expect anything except the turmoil and the chaos that have been engendered by the complete loss of confidence on the part of our allies, and more importantly, our enemy, as to the determination and the integrity of the United States. Now, going on with the story, the night we arrived in Mukwa, the Viet Cong dropped 21 rounds of mortar in our compound. The next morning, you can't see this picture, but it's a fine-looking little Vietnamese officer. The next morning at daybreak, this lad showed up with a bloody pistol belt and a VC flag. I fell in love with the little fellow. I said, son, I must meet your father. But, sir, you can't. The VC have killed him. An hour later, we had a battlefield adoption. That boy attained the name of Jeff. You know where that came from, don't you, Professor? This picture I have of him here says, to Chung Dong, that means General Watts, my adopted father, your son, Dai Wei Captain Vo Van Chin, parenthesis Jeff. And in terminating this, I hadn't intended to do this because at my age, it almost makes me cry to read this letter. I'm going to read you a letter this lad wrote me a couple of weeks after I got back home, dated 20 February 70. Father, I am respectful. Wishes father and mother a good health. And praying God give good luck and long life to yours for serve to your own nation. Also to help the weakness nation like Vietnam, to destroy the communism, bring back the peace for the peoples of Vietnam. And your son, Jeff Chin, will living together in that good circumstance. Father, I also wish his sister and brothers a good health. Father, even that was the first time you received me to be your adopted son. But my heart always cherish and remember you. I hope someday I can always stay near you. Tragically, he can't. He's gone. To hear your instruction and learn your experience. After you came to take leave with me last time, 17 February 70, and when you were leaving, my heart just painful. And my eyes were following your image until I couldn't saw nothing. And I am thinking, will you think of me when you arrive Taiwan? In particular, your adopted son, Jeff Chin, always deep cut your image in the heart. Respectfully yours, your son, Jeff Chin. Now, folks, those are the kind of people that the news media in America, building their fantastic false and phony images, would have you people believe are not worth fighting and dying for. The thing that has made America the great nation it is, and so far has been, is the fact that we have been ready, able, willing, and even eager to fight and die for the cause of freedom. Now, when America has lost its determination, following the concepts, as he died to make man holy, let us die to make man free, when to America that no longer has any meaning, my friends, America will get what it deserves. I can't help but believe, inspired by a gathering of such people as this, however, that there is a reservoir of determination and integrity and in simple faith in a higher power that will save us from the dilemma that we have brought upon ourselves and provide help, assistance, and support to the oppressed peoples of Asia and the rest of the world, and to the future oppressed peoples of the United States, so that when the time comes, we will find fulfillment of Longfellow's beautiful old school day poem. Miss Ann, I've given this one before, but it's the only way I can stop. It goes like this: thou too, sail on, O ship of state, sail on, O Union, proud and great. Humanity, with all its fears, with all its hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate.
Thank you, General Watts. It was a magnificent speech. General Watts could talk on 1,000 things. I think probably one of the most heart-rending, moving stories he ever tells is about General Walker and what happened to him. And if it wasn't for General Watts, I don't really know what would have happened to him. He's a wonderful man, and we're very proud and honored to have him here. And to you, Merrill Root, there isn't anybody else like you. And thank you.